I'd like to let everyone know that we are about to begin. Just as a reminder, we audio and video record our meetings. So for the board members, I ask that when you have something to say on the record, you push your microphone button, and when you're finished, push it to disconnect. We do get limited access to microphones. Also, if you have a cell phone, if you would not put it near the microphones, we pick up a lot of feedback. And last month we had a lot of trouble hearing people through that. So with that, we may have a couple members on the phone. They will identify themselves as they join
the conference.
And with that, I will turn it over to our Finance Committee Chairman, McGallis.
Would you please call the roll?
Sure. Director Anderson?
Here.
Director Colson? Director DeWitt?
Here.
Director Cotel?
Here.
Director Lewis?
Here.
Director Melvin? Director Troiani?
Here.
Director McGallis?
Here.
We have a quorum of 6 present with 2 absent. If the record would also show that Directors Durante, Frega, Fuentes, Higgins, Pang, Ross, Dr. Sagar by phone, and Chairman Dillard are also in attendance.
Thank you. Second item on the agenda is approval of minutes from the meeting held on June 21st, 2018. Are any questions or comments? If not, could I have a motion and a second to approve? Motion by Director Lewis, second by Director Tarani. Roll call.
Director Anderson?
Yes.
Director DeWitt? Yes. Director Cotel?
Yes.
Director Lewis?
Yes.
Director Troiani?
Yes.
Director McGallis?
Yes.
6 ayes and 2 absent.
Thank you. Item 3 is a presentation of the quarterly performance report. Jill?
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'll be presenting the quarterly performance report. We provide this report on a quarterly basis at the same time that you are reviewing quarterly budget results to certify the service boards are in substantial accordance with their budget. I will present year-to-date performance results through the second quarter of 2018 in comparison to 2017. First, let's look at system-wide ridership performance. Using data from the National Transit Database, NTD, we can see regional ridership results for January through June over a 15-year period. 2018 had the lowest first-half ridership of the 15 years shown, totaling 281.7 million trips, which was 0.7% lower compared to the first half of 2004. Compared to the first half of last year, ridership for the first half of this year was 3.1% lower, a difference of 9.1 million trips. This chart shows RTA system first half 28 ridership by mode, represented by the blue bars. The orange dot within each bar represents the peer average ridership performance for that mode. Our service board's performance was favorable to peer averages for 4 of the 6 modes. Compared to 2017, CTA bus ridership is down 3.4% and CTA rail ridership is down 2.9%. Each bus peer agency reported ridership losses for the first half of 2018 and for the heavy rail mode, only Philadelphia saw an increase, aided by their Super Bowl parade attendance, some mode shift from their bus service, and the elimination of premium route fares. Metro ridership was down 3.2%, about 2.5 percentage points lower than the peer average. Pace Bus showed a 3.5% ridership decrease from the first half of 2017, which was about 0.5 percentage point worse compared to its peers. Vanpool experienced a ridership gain of 2.5%, whereas its peer average loss was 5.4%. And ADA paratransit ridership increased 0.9% compared to a peer regional average decrease of 1.7%. This chart shows year-over-year regional ridership through June, using the same peer metropolitan areas that we use in our annual peer review. Each region recorded ridership losses. You can see here the Chicago region ranks second of the 10 regions with a 3.1% ridership decrease versus the average regional peer ridership loss of 5.7%. On this chart, we are looking at a few service and financial measures. Year-to-date performance is some favorable performance for 2 measures shown by green arrows, with 1 red arrow showing unfavorable performance. The three black arrows shown for vehicle revenue hours, vehicle revenue miles, and operating cost per vehicle revenue hour indicate performance roughly equal to the prior year. Regional operating costs, after being adjusted for inflation, decreased 1.4%. However, ridership was 3.1% lower. The resulting operating cost per passenger trip of $4.71 was 8 cents higher, an unfavorable difference of 1.8%. Following fare increases at all three service boards in the first quarter, each reported improved fare revenues. Region-wide, the fare revenue per passenger trip, or average fare, was $1.74, which was 12 cents higher, a 7.4% improvement over the first half of 2017. The fare recovery ratio shown here reflects the ratio of fare revenue to operating expense without any credits or exclusions. A recovery ratio of 36.3% is 1.2 percentage points higher compared to 2017, primarily due to the improvement in fare revenue. This concludes my presentation. Happy to try to answer any questions.
Thanks, Joe. Are there any questions or comments?
Mr. Chairman, how much work has been done to understand the reductions? I mean, has anybody done any studies to figure out where people are going?
Yeah, I think a lot. We kind of highlighted that within our 5-year strategic plan that we presented at the beginning of the year. I think nationally, you can see here, ridership is going down across the nation. I think there's a lot of studies being done about what's happening, lower gas prices, competition through the Ubers and Lyfts in the world, and congestion on the streets, which is slowing buses down significantly. So I think a lot has been being done. I think in within our region, we're studying that, and we're trying to work with the service boards as well as the city of Chicago and all the suburban municipalities to address that. So I think a lot is being done. I think there's always a lag on kind of action towards that.
Any other questions or comments? If not, thank you. Move on to item 4A, resolutions certifying the financial results, second quarter of 2018. B.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Have you met Tim McGowan, our new budget principal analyst? So he'll be joining me today.
Welcome.
Today we will review the year-to-date financial results which are subject to board certification. The service board's financial results through the second quarter were satisfactory. System ridership was essentially at budget. Operating revenue was slightly unfavorable, but expense performance was solid despite higher fuel prices. The recovery ratio finished the quarter above budget at 50.5%. We would like to point out that while there is no red showing in the ridership section, there has been showing significant shortfalls for all of 2016 and 2017. This does not mean that ridership is improving, but rather that the service boards base their 2018 revenue budgets projections on more realistic ridership assumptions, something that the RTA and the board here has strongly encouraged. At the end of the presentation, I will be recommending that the board certify that the results of the operations for each service board and the region as a whole are in substantial accordance with the adopted 2018 budget. So now, going to ridership. System ridership through June was 0.2% above budget, as shown by the orange bars on the chart. Ridership has been down from 2017 in each of the first 6 months, except April, as expected due to fare increases, resulting in total ridership decrease of 3.2% from 2017. Back on the summary table, CTA and PACE ADA reported favorable to budget ridership, while Metro and PACE Suburban Service reported unfavorable ridership, with total system ridership essentially at budget, as I noted earlier. Now looking at operating revenue, that was an $8.6 million or 1.5% unfavorable to budget. The shortfall is due primarily to the lower level of reduced fare reimbursement from the state. PACE Suburban Service has the most substantial operating revenue shortfall, that's highlighted in red, due to lagging fare revenue and reduced fare funding. ADA Paratransit operating revenue is 6.7 favorable, highlighted in light blue due to favorable fare and ancillary revenue. The public funding section of the dashboard shows a minor shortfall from budget of 0.5% for the region. Sales tax continues to show surprising strength, with the latest results May about 6% higher than 2017, prior to the 1.5 state surcharge. The real estate transfer tax, the RET, has swung favorable to budget after strong April results related to the sale of the Prudential Plaza on Randolph. In total, year-to-date public funding is $3.4 million unfavorable to the 2018 budget. Now, looking at operating expenses through June, they were $23 million, or 1.7 favorable to budget, with all service boards reporting favorable results. Metro had a 3.2% favorable to budget variance, highlighted in light blue, due to favorable operations, maintenance, and administration results. Pace Suburban Service had a 3.4 favorable to budget expense performance, also highlighted due to favorable operation and administration results. Now let's look at fuel. After the first quarter, we alerted you to unfavorable fuel trends at the service boards. Through the second quarter, fuel expense was still unfavorable to budget by a combined $4.2 million, or 8.6%, as high prices persist. This is essentially the same percentage variance as the first quarter, and the variance was more than offset by favorable variances in other expense categories. At the regional level, favorable operating expenses more than offset the unfavorable operating revenue and public funding, producing a system-wide net result that was $11 million favorable to budget. Metro and ADA Paratransit each had a net result variance in excess of 3% due to good expense performance. Now looking at recovery ratios, during the second quarter, the regional recovery ratio strengthened above the 50% level and is favorable to budget by 0.3 percentage points at 50.5%. The fair revenue recovery ratio of 36.3 is 1.2 percentage points higher than last year, and the all revenue recovery ratio of 42.4 is 1.8 percentage points higher than last year. So it's reflecting the positive impact of the service board fare increases. In the right section, CTA's recovery ratio lags budget about 0.6% due to their operating revenue shortfall, while Metro's recovery ratio was almost 2% higher than budget, driven by favorable expense performance. Focusing on the certification of year-to-date financial results through the second quarter, this slide shows the variances of each service board's operating deficit from budget. Each service board except CTA had a favorable variance in operating deficit, and Metro and Pace's ADA's favorable variance exceeded 3%. The combined regional operating deficit was $14.3 million, or 1.8% favorable to budget. CTA's unfavorable operating deficit variance of 0.9% is well within the 4% threshold for second quarter compliance contained in our substantial accordance guidelines. Accordingly, I recommend that the results of the operations of each service board and the region taken as a whole be found in substantial accordance with the adopted budget through the second quarter. That concludes my remarks. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. You showed the positive results of the fare increases, and of course we have somewhat of an offset of that with the ongoing reduction by the state of lack of reimbursements. Certainly we're getting mighty close to not meeting the 50% fare box recovery ratio. Could you talk a little bit about how the different service boards are going to help, I guess, meet that in the near future?
So the good news is, and I'm just looking for something so I can give you actuals. As part of the funding allocations presentation, you'll hear more about the recovery ratios. We did not raise them as part of the negotiated, consensus we addressed in the funding allocations. The service boards, as you can see, they're very tight, so they're opposed to increasing them. However, I wanted to share with you, for reference, what they were for 2017, and in fact, they all exceed them. It's just worrisome to them to set them at the higher rate. But for CTA, for example, the actual 2017 recovery ratio was 55.5. And in 2017, it was, for Metro, 55.5. Pace Suburban was actually at 28.9, and Pace ADA was at 10%, but that's because the 10% is all they have to meet. So it was really, in all cases, they were favorable to budget. So even though they're set at this amount, we fully expect them to exceed them as they're and I just had 1 year of comparison here, but there are prior years, and they've always exceeded them. So it is tight. That's what they're comfortable with. But we fully expect that they will be exceeding them. And remember, it's at a regional level that we have to meet that 50%. So some of the service boards are stronger than others, in this case, Metra. And it appears that way even through the current 2018 period. So if that gives you comfort, that's what I can tell you about.
Well, we've been living with this for a number of
Correct.
years now, so it's just something that we need to keep an eye on.
And we also have, as part of our legislative agenda, a plan to seek additional recovery ratio credits because we aren't getting the full amount of RFR, and that doesn't fully cover the cost of those rides. The CFOs have pushed very strongly for getting additional recovery ratios credits, and we think it's justified. We think it's justified given everything else that's going on, and the surcharge and the PTF reduction and so forth. So we think that it makes sense to pursue that on the legislative agenda, and I know it's on the list.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? Yes, Director Lewis.
I want to ask, I know that the service boards present alternative budgets in terms of, worst case scenario. My question is, do they model variables within that budget? For example, I was looking at ridership, and, it could be something that might be isolated, saying, what if ridership goes down by 25%? What impact does that have on the rest of the budget? Is that something that the service boards practice,
Yes.
or is it just at a macro level that they tend to, slice and dice the budget?
So a couple of things. There are no alternative budgets per se. There's only one formally adopted budget, and obviously they're adopted at the service boards, and then our board then adopts the consolidated budget. But prior to doing that, and you'll hear a little bit more about this in the discussion about the funding allocations, we bring economic experts in. We have a 10-year model that we play with, and actually it's developed here at the RTA, but all of the service boards have access to it, and we do everything. We do sales tax growth rates at different levels. We do fares at different levels. We do, it's just a model that you can put in all those variables, right? The surcharge, we played with that. What if it went away? What if they increased it? We did PTF, at different levels. It was supposed to go away completely, 0, and now it's at 5%, but instead of the 10%, it's an improvement. So we play with all of that and expenses and so forth, and come up with a lot of scenarios, when we kind of fall off the cliff, and everything in between. And so we gave them access to it. They love to plug in their own numbers, but in the end, they have to come back with a balanced budget, by November to you, and so that's how they make that work.
Any additional questions or comments? If not, could we have a motion? Motion by Director Tarani, second by Director Lewis. Roll call.
Director Anderson?
Yes.
Director DeWitt? Yes. Director Cotel?
Yes.
Director Lewis?
Yes.
Director Troiani? Yes. Director McGallis?
Aye.
6 ayes and 2 absent.
Thank you. The next item is item 4B of an ordinance establishing the estimates of the amounts available to the service boards for the 2019 through 2021 operating budgets, the required recovery ratios for 2019, and the preliminary 2019 through 2013 capital program funds. B.
Again, over the past couple of months, we used a collaborative process working with the CFOs and their finance teams. I want to acknowledge Jeremy Fine, Tom Farmer, and Rocky Donahue and their teams for their excellent collaboration and hard work in reaching consensus. Doug is not here with us, but Bill Lackman, our treasurer and budget manager, will be presenting the details of the funding allocations for 2019. And again, all this does is establish their spending levels, their funding levels of public funding that they will use then to build balanced budgets. But it's a particularly challenging year because, as I said earlier, we still have the surcharge, we still have the PTF, But certainly, they'll work hard to make sure that they produce balanced budgets. Bill?
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman McGallis.
Mike?
Good morning.
Good morning again, Chairman McGallis, members of the Finance Committee, and members of the RTA Board. As Bea mentioned, I'd like to thank my colleague Doug Anderson, who could not be here today to make this presentation, for his efforts to facilitate the agreement on the proposed funding levels. Also, as Bea mentioned, this item addresses the proposed operating and capital funding amounts for the 2019 budget and the 5-year capital program. Setting the funding amounts is a critical step in the RTA region's annual budget process. The RTA Act establishes September 15th as the date by which the funding amounts for the upcoming year must be adopted by the RTA Board. For the 4th consecutive year, we are poised for early adoption of the funding amounts. The RTA Act requires the service boards to develop budgets that are consistent with the funding amounts adopted here. The first step in setting the funding amounts is establishing a sales tax forecast done in collaboration with the CFOs of the service boards. We also examine a multitude of economic factors. Tourism continues to be a bright spot, with 55.2 million visitors to Chicago in 2017, reaching 2 years ahead of schedule, a goal set by the mayor back in 2014. Our region's unemployment situation has improved over the past 12 months, with the jobless rate declining to 4.2%, well in line with the national unemployment rate of 4%. Following less than 2% growth in 2016 and 2017, sales tax performance over the first 5 months of 2018 has been strong at 4.8% growth, supported by rising motor fuel prices. Our custom forecasts for Moody's and the Chicago Federal Reserve, however, suggest slower growth as the year progresses, followed by growth in the mid 3% to mid 4% range for 2019. While the state fiscal year 2019 budget still contained reductions in funding for transit, the reductions were less onerous than the state fiscal year 2018 budget. The sales tax surcharge was reduced from 2% to 1.5%, and the PTF cut was reduced from 10% to 5%. However, the annual impact of those two actions still amounts to approximately $38 million less funding for the RTA and the service boards. On a brighter note, the state fiscal year 2019 budget contained a mechanism to collect use tax on most online transactions contingent upon the Wayfair decision by the U.S. Supreme Court. As a result, RTA sales tax collections are expected to increase $4 million to $5 million annually beginning later this year. Our resulting assumption for sales tax growth is based on a review of regional and national economic performance, including custom forecasts provided by the Chicago Federal Reserve staff and Moody's Analytics. After discussions with the service board CFOs, we have assumed 3.8% sales tax growth in 2019, with lower growth of 2% in 2020 and 2021, consistent with forecasts for slowing economic activity. Our 2019 assumption of 3.8% growth falls between the Federal Reserve and the Moody's forecasts and incorporates expected improvements in use tax collections related to online sales. Real estate transfer tax receipts are expected to be flat in 2009 after some large one-time commercial transactions in 2018, including the sale of the Prudential Plaza and the Hancock buildings office spaces. This table shows the amounts of RTA funding proposed for the service boards. It compares the proposed 2019 funding allocations to the 2018 budget levels and the original 2017 budget. Total proposed RTA funding for the service boards of $1.5 billion represents an increase of 4.1% from the 2018 budget. However, the proposed 2019 funding levels are up less than 1% from the original budget, adopted prior to the state fiscal year 2018 reductions in transit funding. In other words, the proposed 2019 service board funding levels are essentially flat with the pre-cut world of 2017, before the introduction of sales tax surcharges and PTF reductions. In addition to the statutory funding prescribed by the RTA Act, each service board also receives some non-statutory funding, adhering to the funding framework established back in the budget year for 2015. This chart shows the percentage of total proposed operating funding, including the real estate transfer tax, to be received by each service board. CTA, 52.4%, Metra, 26.1%, PACE Suburban Service, 10.7%, and PACE Regional ADA Paratransit Service, also 10.7%. These shares are very similar to the way the funding pie appeared last year. As you will recall, the RTA Act requires aggregate operating revenues to equal at least 50% of the aggregate operating costs of providing public transit in our region. As B mentioned, the service board recovery ratios are proposed to remain unchanged for 2019. Each service board is charged with achieving its individual ratio in order to ensure that the regional recovery ratio equals 50% or more. The proposed ratios are 54.75% for the CTA, 52.5% for Metra, and 30.3% for PACE. The regional ADA paratransit recovery ratio is set at the statutorily required minimum of 10%. Shifting now to our capital funding picture. The 2019 capital program includes funding of $718.3 million. The federal formula amount is based on levels established by Congress in 2015 with the passage of the FAST Act, and adjusted based on the actual 2016 and 2017 apportionments. The lack of a state capital program for the 5th consecutive year is the primary reason we are experiencing capital funding shortfalls. Without any new source of state funding, 2019 federal formula funds comprise 71% of the total 2019 capital funding. Service board funds are expected to contribute 11%, including PACE bond proceeds. We need to continue to identify and secure new sources of capital funding since the current level of capital investment is not sustainable. Invest in Transit, our region's transit strategic plan, makes the case for pursuing dependable funding streams of $2 million to $3 million annually over the next 10 years. Billion annually over the next 10 years. This would provide adequate funding for our growing capital backlog, as well as for identified priority projects. This pie chart shows how the capital funding from all sources is split among the service boards. CTA, $411.5 million, or 57.3%. Metra, $210.7 million, or 29.3%. And PACE, $96 million, or 13.4%. Unlike operating funds, the capital funding amounts remain preliminary until the budget and capital program is adopted. These amounts will be updated if additional sources of capital funding become available. Finally, here is a snapshot of the business plan calendar through the remainder of the year. The RTA board adopted the budget call in May, setting up the budget development schedule. Today, we are recommending board adoption of the funding allocations as I've presented. On October 11th, 7 weeks from today, the service boards submit their operating budgets, 2-year financial plans, and 5-year capital programs to the RTA before entering the public hearing process in October and November. November 15th is the statutorily defined date for the service boards to submit their adopted budgets to the RTA. On November 28th, a special RTA Finance Committee meeting will be held to review the budgets and capital programs of the service boards. On December 13th, staff will present the consolidated regional budget for board adoption. The RTA and the service boards have again worked collaboratively through several rounds of negotiations to reach consensus on funding levels that address the needs of the region and the service boards in a fair and equitable manner, almost 1 month prior to the statutorily required deadline. Accordingly, staff is requesting that the Finance Committee recommend board adoption of the funding amounts presented. This concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to try to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank the staff for working with the service boards and being able to put together the document that we have before us today. I know it takes a lot of time and effort and compromise in some extent to achieve that. The document certainly has a lot of things that are going to be difficult ahead of us. It has uncertain funding from the state, continuing to hope that they will come through with some funding and continue to fund items. That is yet to be known whether that'll happen. The other one item that I was thinking maybe you could spend a little bit more time on is the Wayfair case. We're using $4 to $5 million per year that we think that'll generate in new revenue. Can you talk about how you came up with that number?
Sure. The state actually is projecting $150 million for their 6%, 6.25% statewide use tax. So we have a use tax that's much smaller than that, and so it's in proportion to what the state had estimated for its 6.25%.
Is the state at this point providing us any additional information on the who's paying the use tax and for the commerce, for the, I guess, internet, the questions that we had during the past year?
We don't have any information.
Yeah. So we have to, our numbers then are totally relying upon what they are interpreting that revenue projection to be.
Yes.
Okay. Are there any other questions or comments? Yes, Director DeWitt.
Backing up to the real estate transfer tax projections, I assume there was a spike in this year's revenue for Chicago CTA regarding those significant property transfers.
Yes, it is.
What was the impact of that spike? Do you have any idea?
I don't know the amounts specifically for those two transactions, but it is commercial real estate that really sets those.
So I would add that the city's budget office does an annual estimate. It's as good a guess as the rest of them. Because you really never know what's going to come up on the market. Things come up suddenly. And so even though they kept it flat, I actually thought it was a bit low. And we've had a lot of discussions back and forth, but the CTA was comfortable. We've always used the city's projection, which comes out in August, July or
July
August.
31st, August
And
1st.
so we're going to stick with that, approach. But they really don't know what's going to come up and when it's going to close and when, that tax is going to be paid. So it's their best estimate.
Any other questions or comments?
Just
Chairman Dillard.
sometimes it's hard to get a handle on numbers that are this large, but just in terms of a relationship, Indiana, just for the South Shore rail line, a line that carries a pittance of what Metra carries, is going to spend more than $1 billion to improve that line. We're at $718 million. Indiana, for one small rail line, a state half our size, is doing over $1 billion. That is not even taking into account what they're doing in Indianapolis. And I constantly use a quote that comes out of the mayor's office in Indianapolis: to try to sell your city to millennials without mass transit is like trying to sell them a phone without a camera. But just to keep things in perspective, to show you how effective our $718 million number is, one small line in Indiana is more than $1 billion. And if you compare us to California or Dallas, other cities that are significantly trying to do things with respect to economic development, our state, I just think, does not realize how important mass transit is, like other states do, in trying to attract the labor force and keep our folks here in Illinois, including our return of $4 of private sector investment for every dollar that is invested in mass transit. But the states that certain newspapers and other folks love to point to, clearly those states invest a great deal in mass transit, because they know mass transit, like Jeff Bezos does in his Amazon request for information, puts just a premium on mass transit delivery as one of the factors that goes into where they make their decisions to locate workers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Higgins.
On slide 5, do you have a sense of what drives the ADA budget increase, which is more significant over the last 2 years than the other service boards?
Yeah, there's two things. Number one is ridership, and number two are the contracts with the service providers.
And I know we've talked about the contracts with the service providers before, but can you just kind of recap that for us quickly?
So those contracts are cost per hour, and they increase, I think, 2 to 3% per year, and then the rest of the increase is ridership growth.
They successfully negotiated those contracts and did achieve some significant savings in the last few years. And some of the prior board members or the longer standing may remember that, where we've brought you some savings. Unfortunately, they do have built-in increases, and then it's volume driven. There's also a lot of activities underway to continue to look at those costs and try to contain them, but it is volume driven.
Any other questions or comments? If not, the chairman certainly highlighted a item that's of concern to us, and that's the capital funding. Again, we have a budget that falls far short, or projections anyway, and it's in large part to not having any state capital budget. Now, could one of you tell us what was the last time, or how long it's been since we've had a capital budget? I know it's been over 5 years, isn't it, Jeremy? What's it?
2009 was the last time a capital program was passed at the state level. That was supposed to run for 5 years, so through 2014.
Yeah, which is incredible when you think about it. I mean, other states are certainly not in that same situation that we're in.
And as I said all along, when and if the Congress ever passes a major infrastructure bill for President Trump, we had to have matching money. We were able to limp along with the mayor's tax increment financing plan from a couple of years ago as the Obama administration came to a close to have the requisite match primarily for the red line. But at some point in time, and I've also pointed out, when I or Leanne go to conferences, the Indianapolis Chamber of Commerce representative, along with my counterpart in Phoenix, at one conference we were at in Washington, joked, if Illinois is not ready to go, we thank you for the billions of state, primarily probably gas tax, federal motor fuel tax monies. We'll take that in Indianapolis or Milwaukee or Phoenix any day of the week. But we got to be ready to go whenever Congress passes their plan, and we are grossly ill-prepared at a state level for infrastructure improvements, and hopefully at some point in time in the remaining however many days there are in a gubernatorial election, we'll hear what the capital funding plans are of both of all four candidates for governor that are out there.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? If not, could we have a motion and a second to approve? A motion by Director Lewis, seconded by Director DeWitt. Roll call.
Director Anderson?
Yes.
Director DeWitt?
Yes.
Director Cotel?
Yes.
Director Lewis?
Yes.
Director Troiani?
Yes.
Director McGallis?
Aye.
6 ayes and 2 absent.
Thank you. If there's no further business to come before the public session of the Finance Committee, entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion by Director Troiani, second by Director Lewis. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Nay. The ayes have it. The committee's adjourned. Thank you.
Right into the real meeting.
Yeah.
All right, I will call the regular meeting of the Regional Transportation Authority Board of Directors to order, and let's begin as we always